I okay. Okay, so I decided to do a recording session for this next thing I'm gonna do. This is a personal project, and I to give some background, which don't expect many people to watch this, but anyway, just for my own recollection purposes. I have this project called React Use Effect Katas, and I this is a see it's a React project built with Bit and Tailwind, TypeScript, some other stuff, which doesn't matter. If I run this project, emp dev opens to be this thing. This is kind of built um, already, more or less. And this is katas for the React use effect. A kata is a little exercise designed to practice a specific thing. Then the weight structure, for example, go to the window size, have a switch input, a start and finish states, and I have a starting point, which is a widget which is incomplete in regards of functionality, and then I have the finish point, which is the complete version. In this case, this keeps track of the width and height of the window dynamically. So if I size the window, this value inside changes, and the start version, it doesn't do anything. And the purpose of all this is to practice some aspect, well, really to practice anything, but in this case, some aspect of React use effect book. Yes, React use effect. See, I'm getting some chat, but my OBS application does not show that window. I don't know what you guys are saying. Let me try to maybe in view. Set no. In collection tools, it should be displayed somewhere. It's not. Here. Usually displayed, but this time is fortunately. Well, can live with that. You asked something in the chat. I'm sorry, I'm not going to see it. So we go to the use effect. The use effect has a lot of like caveats and different use cases and different things you have to be careful with. Yeah, apparently my stream is being cut, fortunately, because my connection, maybe it's not. Oh, why did it change the network? Is it recording or not? Let's see. It's terrible. I think it may be a recording, but YouTube is not recording. Okay, reconnecting. Let's see if it works or not. I think it should be. I think this connection speed is decent. Let's test it. Now this is already making me waste time. Yeah, it's okay. It's enough. It's fast enough. So this is, there is a bit of delay here, but it's working. Okay, so let's close this thing. It didn't stop recording. Okay, so we're back here. This is the use effect documentation. There's a lot of stuff here. So I thought, wouldn't it be nice if I can generate, instead of looking at these docs, and generate katas, again, these little exercises by hand, I can automatically generate them. And I, of course, thought maybe ChatGPT can do it. Have this one, act use effect kata. I have conversation with ChatGPT where it actually works, kind of. Yeah, passing the use effect docs, and I ask a bunch of questions step by step, like a workflow basically, and I end up with this. Actually, this is entirely generated by ChatGPT. I didn't do anything by myself here. I just set out this layout to generate this, to view these katas nicely, and this is just done with we look at this window size thing. We have an index, just exports the kata, and the kata has a title, a code toggle, the start and finish. The start is the unfinished version of the component, and the finish is the finished version of, or the widget of the widget. And this is all the same for all katas. And if I go to the finish, for example, this is specific to the kata. This is the same for all katas. I should. A component. But let's ignore this for as a matter. It's not such a big component. This is the specific content for this kata. And this is the thing that is generated by ChatGPT. So in conclusion, my workflow shows that ChatGPT or an AI can make these katas by itself, including the README file, which if I go through it, it's actually a bit, if I did this thing by myself, it would be a bit better, but not much. Just maybe a bit more readable, but then I would have to do it by myself, and that's a lot of time. So what I get from ChatGPT is good enough, actually. It's pretty good. So then let's close this thing. We don't care about this thing now. And then I saw that there is a Vercel AI SDK, which basically allows you to it's an SDK. It's an AI SDK, which is basically a series of APIs and utilities to help you build workflows with integrated AI. More precisely, it helps you build front ends with integrated AI. And can maybe example. Let's see. I guess here, yeah, this is an example of a front end with which is a chatbot. And this chatbot ask it things. Well, this is a chatbot which somehow specializes in some financial crypto stuff. So what are the price of Doge now? ask it this thing, it's printing some kind of widget. And well, let's not go into how it is doing this, but it's basically leveraging something called OpenAI call, which is part of the OpenAI API, and it allows you to pass in function definitions to the API of OpenAI, and the AI is smart enough to know when to call the function. The function the function is written in your code and is run in from within your project, in your code, so to say, not in an OpenAI server or something like that. I think just that you basically pass in instructions to the OpenAI API to tell it, hey, you have these functions available. When you need this specific information, that the API is smart enough to know when it needs the specific information, then it's gonna delegate getting this information to a function call, and then it's gonna return a function call, and you parse this function call from your project, and you call this function within your project, and then you add the output of the function to the history, the chat history, and OpenAI has access to it, chat history, because keep on passing the chat history to the API. That's how this is rendered as a component in the application. So something like that. So this is pretty impressive. You can do lots of things with this. Here is one case where imagination is the limit. Okay. Because you basically have your app now has a brain and has hands. The brain is the AI, and the hands are the ability to call functions, so to interact with the outside world. Because you can ask it to render a specific UI, to call a specific function, to do some calculation, and that means you can call third-party APIs and get all sorts of data from the outside world. You can interact with databases, getting values from databases, setting values in databases. That means that in terms of information and data, you can basically do anything that you want to an artificial intelligence. And again, that means that the sky is the limit on what this thing can do. Creativity is the only thing stopping us from doing anything with AI, I think, at this point. We are in the prehistory of AI integrated into everything that we do today, and we're gonna see that creeping or progressing faster and faster. Anyway, so I found this thing, and the way I found it is because I know this tool exists, Morphic SH, which is a very cool prompter for doing searches online. Let's ask it, for example, what is Grok? And then you're gonna see slow. No, you're gonna see it's getting some images, and it's printing some results, which looks like from a Google search, and it's getting the information from these pages, and it's giving an answer even with images. And then it's doing it's proposing some related queries to dig down on the topic. And there's AI behind this, obviously, but then it's doing a bunch of things which look like magic. And then I found out this is a public repo on GitHub, which I actually have locally. And if you actually look at what this has, because I found this thing, this application, and I was quite amazed, honestly. I was wondering, how does this thing work so well, doing online search and so many things automatically by itself? If you pass in a vague query, I want to know about dogs. I think this is quite vague, so let's see. Yeah, okay. Apparently this is not vague enough. If you pass in a vague query, it will ask you to be more specific on what you want to know. So for example, what is the best laptop? It's gonna ask me the best for what? Yeah, you see, it has these suggestions. What primary use for gaming and for program programming? Programming. There you go. Send it. Then it does the query with the additional information, and so it has a rather complex workflow, and I thought this is amazing. I'm very curious how this is built. Then I figured out they have a public repo, and I downloaded the public repo and started looking at this. It's our next JS project, which uses some libraries I didn't know, like exa, and then it uses this thing called AI, and I thought, what AI? What? And I found this Vercel AI SDK. I also look at the workflow a little bit, so maybe we can get an idea of how this is done. So we have this whole thing is in the page. Wait a second. Layout. We have the page. Pages has a chat. It's a client component, but also has this exporting this runtime edge. I don't think this makes sense. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I think you should export this from server components. I'm not entirely sure. I looked at the docs, at the Next.js docs. I didn't find that explicitly, but kind of seems to make sense that you need to export the server runtime from a server component, but I may be wrong. Sure. So the chat component has a chat messages and then chat panel, and then look at chat messages. This is using a UI state hook ordered from AIRSC, which renders some messages. So like messages.component, what the React node, okay? And then we go to the other one, chat panel. We see here it's using some normal React stuff, but then it has use UI state, use AI state, and use actions, all imported from AIRSC. And so the first question is, wow, okay, so this is where the magic seems to come from. And this is a bunch of stuff which doesn't really matter too much now. It's just some UI. For example, this is the input that we get first to do a query. But then we look at the, for example, this use action, so which has a submit return value. This submit return value, without going too much into details comes from this server action. This is a Next.js thing. And the server action has a submit function, and it has an export value, which is an AI thing. This is a provider that contains some actions and initial UI state, initial AI state. This provider, if we go to the layout, this provider is wrapping the children of the layout. This is the same provider, which comes from, it's imported directly from the action. And this provider is giving access to the client components to these three states. And the use AI state returns an array of AI messages, and the AI messages has the shape that you see here. They have a role, they have a content, and the content is the actual response in text format returned from the AI. And the rest are some optional values here now. It has a setter also. The use UI state is an array of objects which have a component thing, which is a React node. So it's something that can be rendered by React, just by doing this. It's just rendered by doing this, whatever that is. We'll take a look at what that is a bit later. And see, it has a setter also, and this use actions just returns the submit action that we have seen before here. This submit action is where a bunch of magic happens. This submit actions is a server action. It creates some, it initializes some stuff or gets access to some stuff. This is a getter. This is really initializing. It's a getter, some current AI state thing. Then it uses something weird called create streamable UI, which returns a streamable UI, and that's that's what the name indicates. Just that, well, when I started looking at this, I didn't quite know what a stream was, so I did a bit of research. Stream, well, it's actually pretty well described. Next stream, next docs, we have, this is not what I was looking for here. Loading UI and streaming. There is a streaming. So wait a second. So these images are so small. When we load content from the server, the client, usually we have to wait for the entire content available or rendered on the server, and then the client fetches it. It needs to finish getting all the content, and then it can render. And that can be slow depending on what we're trying to render. So this is the process of, in this case, SSR, which is server-side render. First, all data for a given page is fetched on the server. Server renders the HTML of the page. The HTML, CSS, and JavaScript for the page are sent to the client. Non-interactive user interface is shown using the generated HTML and CSS. Finally, React iterates the user interactive. Like this: fetching data, rendering HTML, loading code on the client, iteration. And this takes time. Okay. Steps are sequential and blocking, meaning the server can only render HTML for a page once all the data has been fetched. Yes. So we want to render all. We have this. Basically, we have this empty state while we are waiting for this content fetched, render, and so on. Rated. And the idea of streaming is that you get your UI instead of all at once in small batches. And the way Next.js is built, you can render these batches as they so you can render your UI in chunks instead of passing all these three at once, doing all this process, and you can only see something in the UI once all this content is loaded. You send the content, you do this operation by chunks, by little chunks. These components can be rendered individually, and that's where the concept of servers server, what is that, client server render components as SRC, server render components, right? That's where the idea of server render components comes from. And because this, and okay, and that's one thing, that's the streaming the UI. Okay, we are here, create streamable UI. It gives a UI stream, and what I just described is what this thing is. Okay, drink some water. Recording, I talk a lot. So this UI stream is basically, going into more detail, some object which allows you to render your UI in chunks as they come from the server. So you don't have to wait for everything, for all the UI to come from the server. You can render it in chunks. So you can start seeing something. And why is that relevant with UI? Well, if you go to the docs here, it says here why streaming, and you can see visually what is this example. You work with a chat. When you use a chat, usually you go to the chat GPT, you see all this effect where the words are rendered, displaying the screen one by one, and that's because they are being streamed to the client. If you didn't have streaming, you would see something like this. You see a black screen, and suddenly you see all the text being rendered all at once, because you would have to wait for the response to be complete before rendering it on the client. If you're streaming the UI, you can render text by text, and every text is little chunks that come from the UI, and so you can render this kind of partial state of the response as it comes. And that is why it's relevant, because it's a much nicer user experience. It feels much more natural, like you are interacting with someone who is writing or speaking. And it also allows you to start reading the response before it's complete. So it's a much better user experience. That's why we use streaming for chat-like AI applications. Then it has a bunch of other concepts. I'm gonna go into that. And then it has some basic example of how this works. Like the easiest version of this is we have a root handler, a next root handler, which post request. This post request gets the messages from the request. This is the user input. This is the prompt, basically, kind of. And then it uses the OpenAI API to create a chat completion with the user input. It says here streaming true. And then we pick the response and we apply this OpenAI stream. We create a stream from the response. This is a text stream. Basically, the same I said for UI is applied to a string. So you kind of can imagine this is a text stream, and you have a string which is a long sentence, and you can imagine how each word is appended step by step to the stream, to the string, quite similar. You get this stream, and then you have to apply this function, and this streaming text response basically picks this stream and converts it into a post response that the client then can consume. This is the root handler, so this is the server side code, and then you go to the client side. We have a client component, import this use chat hook, and this use chat hook returns messages, input, handle input change, handle submit. And as you can see, it's very simple. You just fill in the gaps. Basically, this is the output from the UI, and this would include both your message and the message from OpenAI, from ChatGPT if we want. This is because, remember, this is an array. This is an array of messages. See here that we are mapping through the messages, and for each message we are getting the ID, the role, which can be user or something else, and the content, which is the string of the message itself. Now we have this input and handle input change, which basically apply to the input, make it a controlled input, and that's it. But we don't do much else here. As you can see, there is a lot of magic between the scenes, behind the scenes, because you may also ask, how does this, we are not passing anything to the chat, how does it know what API route to get? That's because the API chat route is the default one for this hook. We actually go to the docs of the use chat API reference. In the options for the use chat function, we also have API. As it says here, the default is API chat, but if we have another API endpoint, we can specify it here instead of this one. And then a bunch of other things which I didn't even look at, honestly. Then it returns also a bunch of other things. But this is like easy mode between the scenes. If we look at something else, which is generative UI, then we have I'm not used to talk so much. We have, at some point I will start coding. I think this is probably boring. Besides besides the API route, we have server actions that we can use. And here it does something different and funky, and it's honestly a bit hard to get used to that. First time I saw that, it was like, what the hell is going on here? But we ignored all this code for a second. Well, we don't care about this code. It's just some server components. Here we have this submit function, which is a server function, which first gets some AI state. This is just giving access to a mutable AI state, as this thing says. And this is some magic, okay? There is some internal AI state because of the provider we are using to wrap the application. And this is getting that state. So it's done for us. We don't have to care about this. This AI state has an update which allows you to basically append to override the state. We are rebuilding the entire state. We are having an array. We spread all the previous state is get, and then we append one more element. And this element is a new message, which is the user input coming from the payload. Yes. Then we have this render function, which also is a function that has lots of magic behind it. So it's just a function that does a bunch of things for us. This function returns something that is called UI here, and it's a streamable UI. And the streamable UI is basically it's a component that we can render on the client. For all intents and purposes, it's a component that we can render on the client. It's doing a bunch of things. It's setting up a model. It's setting up a provider, which is OpenAI. It's setting up messages. It's doing some. It has some methods, text. It has a tools object. So it's doing some stuff here. Okay. And then after this function, this render method UI that we set to UI, then we return from this. We are in the submit function. We return an ID and return a display, and this display is set to the UI. Okay, so whatever this thing is doing, we are returning it as a display property. Then we set some initial state, initial UI state, and export AI, and this export is the AI provider. And this is what we need to wrap our application with. And we have seen this before. We have an action, which is a submit action, and we have some initial states. This is basically like, yeah, that's the initial UI state, the AI state. There's no more to that. We can move on. There's nothing else no other detail I want to say with this. And then, as I said, we wrap the app, this AI provider, and in the client component, we import these hooks. Use a UI state, use action. Use action allows you to have access to the server action. Use UI state allows us to access to the UI. And then we go to look at the messages, and we map on the messages because this is an array. And then we render this message.display, and this display was the UI thing that we defined in the server action. So this is basically that UI is a React node which is streamed to the client. That React node is streamed to the client. So it will render in batches, in chunks. So now let's take a look again at this UI. As it says, it's a streamable UI. It's said it's streamed to the client, so it's sent to the client in chunks, and it can be rendered chunk by chunk. And let's take a second look at this text, for example. This text method function takes some content, some done. And this done thing is something characteristic of streamables. Take a look a bit later and say, so let's read. Text is called when the AI returns a text response. Its content is a stream from the LLM, so this function will be called multiple times with content being incremental. And then when it's the final content, mark the state as done, ready for the client to access. So when done is true, then we know the thing finished. The thing finished streaming. The LLM finished sending the message. So we do something. But now remember this. It says this content is being incremental because it's just streaming the stream. And we'll return it. Forget about this thing for a second. we return this incremental content. Okay, so we are returning a React node. This is a React node, and this is gonna be what the UI is. So this thing, the UI is gonna stream this thing, the client. So we're gonna be rendering when we do this, we're gonna be rendering this thing with incremental content, and every time the content increments, we're gonna see that rendered on the front end. Now let's take a look at this condition. When this is done, which means the content finished streaming, we have the whole response from the LLM. We call the done method on the AI state, and this done method says, okay, we're done with this update. This is not gonna update anymore, so you can close it. You can yeah. How can I explain that? It marked the AI state as done. It says, I'm ready for the client to access. So you can assume at this point, when this done method is called, the client has access to this updated AI state as a response to call the submit action. So we're gonna call the submit action. We're gonna run this code. We're gonna stream this content to the client. So we're gonna see incrementally being rendered in the client. And then when this response is finished, we call this done, and then when the call is done, the client will have access to the updated AI state. In this case, we don't use the updated AI state in the client, but that's what it is. And then we have these tools, which is an object, and this object has a get flight info, and that's the function name. Or that more precisely, that's a tool name. It's the name of a tool. It has a description. This is for the LLM. This thing, the LLM is gonna have access to this, well, probably to these things, to the function name, the description of the function, and this basically tell the LLM when it should call this function. And then it has some parameters described in a nice ways with SOT, with this library called SOT. If we look at the OpenAI documentation, see an example of this. We have this tools thing, which is similar but not the same. We have a function name, we have a description, we have some parameters, and these parameters are a definition of how the parameters of the function look like. So basically, what data should the AI pass as parameters for the function to be. And we see this is a bit more verbose, and it's a bit more difficult to read, honestly. Parameters, type of object, properties, location, and location is a type of string. It has this description, this units type of string. It can has these values. It's an enum, and the location is required. So we have this format. This is the format OpenAI defined for their API, and then we have this other format, which is honestly much easier. Parameters, object, flight number, it's a string, and this has this description. It's required also, and the object is required. So this thing is, for me, this is more readable. And then you have the function directly here. It's a async generator. This star means it's a generator, and this keyword means it's asynchronous. It's an asynchronous. It's generator, synchronous generator, and it even has a type, async generator. which let's see if I find something. Yes, okay, this async generator returns an async iterable. Okay, what does that mean? We have this loop here. Okay, we have this loop. Let's forget about this keyword for a moment. Usually a for of loop works with iterables. For of loop script. Let's see if we find a for of statement executes a loop that operates on a sequence of values sourced from an iterable object. So this thingy is iterable. Iterable object is, let's say, for protocol. In order to be iterable, an object must implement the iterator method, meaning that the object or one of the objects of its prototype chain must have a property with an iterator, which is available via constant symbol iterator. It doesn't tell me a lot. Next. Okay, wait a second. Difference between array, hike, iterable, JavaScript. Tables and array likes. Official terms look similar, they're very different. Please make sure you understand. Iterables are objects that implement the symbol.iterator method as described above. Array likes are objects that have indexes and length. So they look like a... Yes. Okay, so I'm not gonna dig deeper into this. Iterables work with for of. And some objects in some values and objects in JavaScript are iterable. By default, for example, strings are iterable, arrays are iterable. This is what it say here. Yeah, arrays are iterable, maps are iterable by default. Objects are not. Objects can be made iterable, I guess, by giving them this property, but by default. Okay, so let's iterables work with for of. Go back to here. This is a for of loop that has an await. It's a weighted for of loop. So this is this type of for loop works with async iterators. So an async generator returns a specific case of an async iterator, which is an async generator. And what does it do? It works like a for of loop, but these values are generated asynchronously, and this loop is gonna wait for each value to be available before moving on to the next iteration of the loop. So it's a for loop, but it's gonna wait. But it's a for loop, but the values are async. It's gonna wait for each value before moving on to the next iteration. This is basically what it's gonna do. Okay, so go back to here. We were here. For the tools, the render function is an async iterator. means it's going to return an async iteration. It's going to take the flight number as an object with a flight number property, because this is what we specify here. And it's going to, first of all, it's going to yield a spinner. This yield is basically a return, but for generators, kind of. This thing, well, I mean, yeah, let's just go look at how generators work. I'm not gonna do a premiere on generators here. We return a spinner in the first iteration. Then, once we get this value, it's gonna run this function synchronously. And once we get the value, we're gonna set the AI state to done. Append the previous state, we're gonna return this called function name, blah, blah, and the content is gonna be a stringified version of the response, whatever this response is. We can take a look at what this function. This function takes a string and returns an object. Okay, because the content needs to be a string, but it can be any string. Stringified JSON also is a valid string, so it's okay. Then after we close the state, we already got the response. We return like we've done before for the text method, where we return a React node. Here we return a React node again, which is a server component, which we have defined here in this very same file. Like here, this is a very straightforward component. Just there's some data, and we pass in the value returned from. So what's gonna happen here is we wanna ask a query. As a user, we wanna send a question to the AI, to the chat. This question is gonna be submitted to this AI model. The AI model is smart enough to understand, hey, the user is asking for information for a flight. So I have this function definition which tells me that it should be called when getting the information, when trying to get the information for a flight. That's the output. Gonna get information for the flight with this function. So the AI model is smart enough to understand, hey, I have a function that I can call for this purpose. That's where the magic happens. That's the AI model. We don't control the AI model. That's, for all intents or purposes, for me, that's magic. That's like having a smart computer there that is intelligent and understands what to do. And so this AI is gonna say, let's call this function, and this function is this one. It's gonna call this function, and it's gonna provide the flight number, because again, we're defining this as a parameter, and the AI model is smart enough to know this is the flight number that the user submitted. So I'm gonna pass it in function, and then this function runs. The AI model is gonna tell, I need to run this function, and then this function is gonna run. And this function is gonna first, roughly speaking, return a spinner thing, which means is loading. Then it's gonna do some async operation, which will gonna take some time, depending on how much time this function takes on executing. It's an API call to a third-party service, a flight operator, and it may take 1 second, 2 seconds, 10 seconds. It may take some time. And once it finishes, the AI state is closed, and then I'm gonna return this updated UI. So while this AI model is doing all this magic, in the user interface, we're gonna see first a loading spinner while we wait for this flight info to be received, and then we're gonna see an updated UI with a flight guide with our info. And that is quite amazing. That is quite amazing. Okay, take I'm gonna take a break. See, I'm gonna take a break. I'm gonna order some food because I'm starving to death. Then I will continue. See ya. Yes. All right. Drive about half an hour. Let me grab something, banana or something like bananas. Okay. Okay, so I'm gonna be coding now. I have this workflow in ChatGPT. Build these katas that I made, katas, and I'm gonna try to build this user interface to go through this workflow streamlined way. Close a bunch of stuff I. Then I'm gonna start. Close this. I created this project. Starting first starting point for this public repo. Let's see, it's running already. Here, nothing. See here. Let's add a title. So what it is. Page. Let's call it Katas AI Rack. AI React, whatever. So this is the client component. Oh, this is the server rep. And I have an action.ts. Yes, add server components. I have this thing. This thing needs to export. I have a project. Out of it's a playground project with lots of things exploring and trying out with this AI. Okay, so I'm gonna have it side to side to my other screen to copy paste things, and this is gonna be similar. Or no, wait, it's gonna be actually very similar to which is here also. More feet we have. This is just a copy paste of them. We have this thing. Okay, sure I need that. Importing. Facing function submit. Well, we'll see. We'll see what it has. But I don't need this thing. I will need this thing, but now but I will actually. But let's go step by step, okay? To do. Go step by step. We're exporting this page. Do it in the layout. It doesn't really matter what I'm. Yeah, I don't expect this to. I can always update. Now we have access to our frontend page. Gonna have. I think we should build. Wait, I think I should start by building a static version of. I should. Well, I can either start by that, or I can start by just building all action. I want the UI because I want a way to visualize whether the action works or not. Also, building the UI first will help me understand what should be the shape of the format of the. We'll see why. Okay, so let's go to our chat. Let's see. I want to create a simple exercise called task. Practice the use effect, blah blah blah. I pass in the docs. This is user input here. So I need input paste doc. Okay. Here I think I can follow this here page, this chat thing, this chat panel. Copy this thing. Under chat panel. Then we import chat panel here. Okay. Chat panel is a client component. Use client. Doesn't take any props. It needs well, now it's gonna be here. It's showing up at the bottom because page has all I top. Okay, with chat panel. So this chat panel, get rid of this. It needs a form input. Well, actually, it should be a text area. Yes, okay. Really ugly. Actually, I have these styles because I was trying to build something in the project. So it should be that server. Where is it? Page. Then we have the components. We have this text area with text. This is really ugly name. Okay. Yeah, no, let's build it from scratch. Let's use the chat.cn. Chat.cn. Doing this off screen. already done this thing. So I can just outright outright this thing. This text area. It's okay, correct? This thing does not text. It's so bad. Basically, of course I want text, but maybe it's not a bad. Maybe it's not a good idea. Maybe it's not a good idea. Here, it's no. Well, wait a second. Except that it's some problem. And then I need to do label this thing. Okay. This is gonna have a label, a description, maybe I should use time because time what is coming early, because time has a text area component which I'm sure already incorporates all the stuff. It's already built for you. So yes, with time you save time. Mantine is a great library. Okay. I could also do this slowly. Let's do label description, label description only if there is a description. Okay, like this. Now if I go to the UI, I would prefer port alias. Let's move on. It doesn't matter. We have this form. Do I have a form from the chat also? Form. React hook from text Z schema form profile Maybe I should. Yeah, okay, let's use this thing. I think it's slightly, but I'm curious also. Here, instruction side, port side over dot form schema and call it dot max 2000. Now let's check what's the length, or let's actually going here and basically the user interface variable. Where is the character count? What is gonna come basically in like characters 35,000. Holy shit. 50. My food is here in like I don't know, 2 minutes. Yes, I'm sooner or later. I expected my food to come a bit, but it's here. Actually gonna eat. So I'll